Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO of News Corporation, Robert Thomson.
Thank you all very, very much. As the moderator, the immoderate moderator of the first panel, I just want to thank you very, very much for getting up for the earliest of today's gatherings, whether that was out of absolute interest or just pure politeness. Thank you so much. The title of our program is Voices of Tomorrow, hosted by a throwback of the past, me, and the basic theme is how is the next generation reshaping business, culture, investment, and society. And to help us understand that pattern and get a little glimpse into the future, I would ask our panelists to come on stage. Thank you all. Now, first of all, I'll introduce our panelists. We have to my far right, Seth Bannon, the founding partner of 50 Years. Unfortunately, I'm on the wrong side of 50 years, so I feel completely unqualified to talk to Seth. But Seth is a seed investor, in fact, a legendary Silicon Valley seed funder. Everything from meat, which is grown outside a cow, to things far more technical. Then to my immediate right, Jean Liu, who is the president of Didi Chuxing. Didi Chuxing has 400 million users. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that, I'm Australian. Australia has about 20 million inhabitants, so it's 20 times the population of Australia, is Jean's customer base. And then to my immediate left, Alicia Mupen, who is the Executive Director and CEO of DM Healthcare. She oversees 90 clinics and 9 hospitals in the GCC. And then to my far left, Ashish Thakkar, who is the founder of the Mara Group and the Mara Foundation. It began as an IT business in Uganda, and Ashish's operations are now spread across 25 African countries, and he has around 11,000 employees. So you have before you a group of relatively young people who have been extraordinarily successful in a short space of time. Now, I live in New York, and as you know, all New Yorkers are shameless name droppers. And so I just wanted to recount a quick conversation I had recently at a gathering of CEOs listening to Jeff Bezos. And Jeff said that disruption is not caused by technology. And he said there's a misunderstanding about that. He said a lot of technology has no impact whatsoever. Disruption is caused by the current of audiences moving from one product to another. And that is what makes disruption real. And so, starting with you, Jean, given that you literally move an audience, is the way that people are being introduced and adopting new technology or new ways of doing things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be technology, is that going to change in the future? Or will it reflect historical patterns of human behavior?
Well, I think it's definitely changing the future as it is doing today. As a matter of fact, 5 years ago, all the taxi drivers don't even use smartphone in China. So we basically convert them one by one from, they don't even have a phone to have a smartphone and then to use app. Right? This is completely changing the habits, the lifestyle of people. And as I think you rightly put it, because we have not just 400 million users, we have 1.4 billion people living in China. And when you have so big population, then there will be innovation everywhere, there will be disruption everywhere. And it's not just disruption in terms of technology, it's about lifestyle, it's about mindset. I think it's a young mindset empowered by technology that's completely transforming our economy and our culture. So, it's a positive answer.
So, Alicia, do your young clients, the people you serve who are, say, between the ages of 20 and 40, do they have different expectations of service to your more senior citizens like me?
Yes, definitely, Robert. I think traditionally and even recently, healthcare is one of those industries that has been least impacted by technology because the willingness to embrace it has been there's been a lot more reluctance in that. And even the providers, when you talk about the doctors and all, they're ones who have a more rigid kind of outlook in terms of adopting these things, just from a change management perspective. But now when you see the younger consumers, the people who want access to healthcare, they all want it to be easier and convenient. And for that, the only way you're going to make it easier and convenient is by embracing some of the options which are available. So definitely we're seeing where people not want to wait 2 hours to see a doctor and then wait another day or two to get some of their results. They want all of this information to be available easily, quickly, at their fingertips. So we're definitely seeing that requirement, that need, and people expect that now. And now you see slowly seeing even the older generation seeing the benefit of having that. So for sure.
And Ashish, you work across so many countries. Do you see common patterns of ambition in those countries, or are there distinct differences really depending on the culture and the region?
It's a very good question, Robert. I mean, obviously, Africa is very, very diverse. We're 54 countries. If you exclude North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa is 46 countries. We're going to have a larger population as a continent than India and China by 2025. And I think that is exactly right, that every single one of our markets is very unique. But the commonality is the fact that 85% of our population is under the age of 35. We have a very, very entrepreneurial community. Our youth are extremely driven. And the best part has been, I've been active across the continent for 21 years. And I was telling Jean earlier that, the definition within Mara for youth changes according to my age. But, I've seen this for 21 years where governments are really focused that youth and empowering, enabling, and inspiring young entrepreneurs is going to be the future for job creation, but also the innovation that our countries will have inevitably.
Just a follow-up question, because you work across so many diverse places, is that very diversity a frustration in trying to scale up a business, or a successful barrier to entry to competitors?
So I personally, I love the fact that we're so culturally diverse because, it's not a copy and paste scenario. You can't, just because something works in one market, it's not as simple as copying and pasting, as is the case in this region. If something works in Saudi, you can't just copy and paste it into neighboring countries thinking it will just automatically work. You've got to truly be local in each market. And I think that is a big upside. However, at the same time, it also works against us that collectively we're such a large market. And therefore, there's a lot of regional integration programs. There's a lot of different programs on the infrastructure side of things and trade side of things that really, and free mobility of people. The Africa Union has actually created an Africa Union passport now in order to enable free migration of people, which will take a little bit of time, but will eventually get there. So I think there's pros and cons to both, but as entrepreneurs, obviously, you've got to take advantage of which one works.
Seth, you meet a lot of young, aspiring impresarios. Which impresses you more, and which are you more likely to invest in? Somebody who's motivated by idealism, who wants to change the world, or somebody who wants to make a hell of a lot of money?
This is, I promise you, not a cop-out. We look for both. So, we've heard about a lot of really interesting, I think, trends at this conference. But a lot of the trends that we hear about every day are trends in the what of business. So AR, VR, drones, transportation. These are all very important trends, but what we see coming is actually a trend in the why of business. And it centers around the question, what is the purpose of business in society? If you ask any other generation, what is the purpose of business? At first, they would probably think that was a quite silly question, and they would say, well, to make money, of course. What else would business be for? If you ask millennials this question, they say something completely different. So Deloitte did a study of 7,700 millennials across 29 countries, and they asked them an open-ended question, what is the purpose of business? And a plurality, 47%, said some version of to improve society or protect the environment. And now they also believe that business should make money in doing so. And so when we look at the entrepreneurs that are having the most success, and the ones that are the most driven, and the ones that are the most relentless in pursuit of their goals, they're ones that truly believe what they're doing is important for either the environment or for society, but also have every expectation of building $1 billion business. When things get really tough, that passion is what drives you through.
Recently, Facebook bought a company called TBH, which was an emerging social network. It was a compliments network, which is a little different to a lot of things that happen on the web, which is mostly an insults network. People use various acronyms. Let's say we'll call it GAF, Google, Amazon, Facebook. For example, does Facebook's understanding of how people are using and interrelating to each other, connecting with each other, does it give Facebook an unfair advantage? And does it mean that creativity will not flourish in its full form because one of those three big companies will see so early on what the trend is and buy the company and not allow it to blossom and bloom?
I think you've touched on one of the fundamental trends in tech. We actually believe it's becoming increasingly difficult to compete with the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts and the Amazons for exactly the reason you mentioned. So not only do they have incredible data advantages where they can see trends coming before anyone else, they also have incredible channel distribution advantages, but they've also all figured out how to create small, nimble teams that can execute in much the same way that a startup can. And so I do think that it's becoming hard to break into the sort of pure SaaS, pure software space these days, which is why we actually focus a lot more on deep technologies, which, just put another way, are things that require a PhD on the team to do. So things like synthetic biology or machine learning or medical devices. These are things where you don't have these big incumbents that are nimble and have these advantages. You have typically very lazy incumbents that are making lots of money but doing a very poor job delivering services or products.
Alicia, Ashish, Jean, do you also worry about the stifling of growth because of in a sense, the insider trading advantage that the intelligence that these firms generate gives them?
Yes, actually, one of the key engines for our business is artificial intelligence and data science. I give you an example here. Let's say out of this meeting, there will be 600 people wanting to get a ride. Unfortunately, there will be traffic, there will be limited supply, so how do we solve it? So we have this system that we keeps track of every minute and at any weather, any day, how many people are coming from here to anywhere. So the machine is keeping learning and recording so that it will have very amazing capability to predict how many people coming out of this conference room. So when we talk about scale in our platform, every day we complete about 25 million rides. That's 600 rides a second. That's bigger than the crowd here. So we match that. So that's the AI, what Seth was talking about is also deep technology. Is trying to help the transportation dilemma that's facing everyone here. So that's the key engine for our business. And also, we're also trying to use the technology to solve the city transportation. For example, now we're talking about rideshare, but going forward, facing a lot of cities like here is how do you make the traffic light more intelligent, right? Should it be traffic light even? Maybe one day we don't need a traffic light if everything is on the cloud and we can manage it in a more intelligent way. So we are working with cities, 20 cities in China right now and globally, so that we work with the city managers to integrate artificial intelligence into the system so that the traffic lights will work much more efficiently, and one day we will not need traffic light anymore. So those are the deep tech that's helping our industry. And also autonomous driving, a lot of people are talking about it. It's all very exciting.
So you would advise people here not to invest in traffic light manufacturers?
I would advise we partner together. We love to work with people here.
Alicia?
So Robert, when we talk about technology, and especially in healthcare actually, one of the biggest things that everyone is working on is on big data in healthcare and how you can use it to improve the health of the population at large. Now, the interesting contradiction when it comes to millennials is, as a generation, we are ones who want instant gratification. And that kind of goes against this big data, because you need, especially for healthcare, you need people who are self-motivated to take care of themselves. If you look at the biggest problems as far as health is concerned, it's chronic diseases. These are things which are not causing you acute problems and having you hospitalized. But in terms of lifestyle changes and behaviors, how are you going to impact that? People have to start using the data as interventions, just like how medicine is given. But that becomes difficult because as millennials, we want to do something that's fun now. We want to have that, go for that dinner. We want to maybe not work out. We want to just think about what's more exciting. So it's going to be important to use that data, but also more important how to motivate people into changing those behaviors. So one side of it is technology that is really there, that will give it to you, in front of your eyes, what you need to do. But at the end, what you do, it comes from within. It has to be from the self.
And Ashish, you must have a lot of people pitching you ideas. Which are you more naturally sympathetic to? Somebody who's incredibly confident and articulate, or someone who's shy and stumbling over their sentences? Who do you suspect has the better idea?
Well, starting at the age of 15 with $5,000, I sympathize with both sides. I think it really boils down to the passion. And I think in Africa, when you think about the fact that we have maybe 90% mobile phone penetration, so over 850 million mobile phones across Africa today. And in the next few years, we're going to have 90% smartphone penetration. Now imagine with every single person having a smartphone, it's going to change the way agriculture is done, healthcare, education, mobility, but it's also going to truly enable commerce across the continent in a true manner. Take Nigeria's one city, Lagos, has 20 million people and has 3 shopping malls. The only way retail is truly going to work is online. And I think that's going to be the big wave, but you need to really tackle the ecosystem in that manner. So I think the potential is phenomenal. Africa created mobile money. We've seen that M-Pesa was created in Kenya. Today, having money on your mobile phone for a grandmother in Kenya in a village is absolutely normal. We've been able to truly leapfrog the traditional method of development. And therefore, the kind of innovation that comes through that. Today, 98% of the economy is transacted through mobile phones. So this is just the beginning and really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going to come, but also the innovation. And hence, I really do believe the fact that we've got such a young demographic is going to be a massive advantage.
Seth, there's a lot of debate about whether Silicon Valley is diverse enough. How important are role models in encouraging people from backgrounds that aren't traditionally impresarios to come to you with an idea, to believe that they too can be successful in Silicon Valley?
I think diversity is a problem in Silicon Valley, and I think this has been shown to be true. And it's not only true from a moral point of view, but it's been shown over and over again that diversity in business leads to better financial outcomes. There was actually a really interesting study done recently that showed that male VCs who just had a female daughter outperformed ones that didn't. Right, so just that perspective nearby allows you to do better. And this applies not only to gender, but across ethnicities and different nationalities. And so I think there are a lot of systemic changes that need to be made, but I also do think that role models are incredibly important. If you look at, Harvard now has a thriving startup ecosystem, and largely it's because people saw Mark Zuckerberg drop out and found Facebook, and Bill Gates drop out and found Microsoft, and they said, I could do that too. And not only, for themselves, but when you're considering starting a company, one of the biggest impediments is convincing your parents that it's a good idea, and they're asking you, why aren't you getting a real job? And to be able to say, hey mom, look, Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, they did this, I could be like them. It's like, okay, sure, like go ahead, silly kid. And so I do think we need more role models from diverse backgrounds. I think that would go a long way towards helping solve the problem.
Jean, you've written about work-life balance.
Right.
And are you in part hoping to inspire both women and men to believe that you don't have to work 24 hours a day to be successful, that you actually can have a life?
Yes, of course. I think who doesn't? Well, I think the key here is to work smart and work efficiently. I think the key here is really to set the goal right? When we talk about young, I think one of the key element to the young generation is they're so passionate. I'm not sure I qualify into that group, but our company, definitely, we're a very young company. We have only 5-year-old history, but we are in a very fast-growing industry. So we have 7,000 people now, 3,000 engineers, and 3,000 women engineers and coders. Right? And I think the key here is when you align 7,000 people go to the same way, it's much more efficient. We don't need to work 24/7 because everyone is so motivated by the things we're doing. I give you one example. I have this young woman accountant. When she joined us, we just want her to be, to be in charge of finance. But she's so curious. She said, why everyone is talking about AI and I don't know anything about it. So now she applies to course in Udacity, which teach open source code on self-driving cars. And she's learning herself and she's trying to figure out, right? So, everyone is motivated in this organization that they want to be an expert in what they're doing. So I think the key here is really to align the goal and find a smarter way to work.
And, Alicia, somebody's first job is such an important moment in their life. I remember I started as a 17-year-old copy boy, and it was, even though it was journalists and they drank too much, far too much, it was actually a quite protective environment.
Yeah.
And I look back now and I think, how lucky was I to be in such a protective, encouraging environment? Are you very conscious when you bring on new employees that their first 6 months, 12 months in the job will fashion their perception about work and actually have a profound influence on their personalities? And what do you do to make sure that they are in an encouraging environment when they arrive?
So again, Robert, like you said, I think your first job does have a profound influence. I started with Ernst & Young, and the kind of mentorship and buddy system that they encourage right from the beginning, it helps you settle down. Going from the study environment to work is a huge transition, and it is very important to try and get them adjusted into it. So we do a lot of programs, especially because being in healthcare, it's really important that the compassion, the care, all of it comes from within. It does take a real toll on you, not just physically, but also emotionally. So it does take a lot of kind of coaching, counseling to make sure that you're ready, emotionally ready for that role. You typically have nurses who've been there 5, 10, 15 years, and then they feel like they can manage that. But when you're having the younger workforce, I think that emotional quotient that needs to come in has to start from when they're very little. So we do sort of do interventions every 3 months, 6 months, just to make sure that they're able to adjust and adapt to that. So there has to be a lot of focus into getting them feel comfortable, understand the purpose. And like you said, as millennials, most of us, I'd like to call myself in that group as well, most of us want to have that impact factor, and that's how we sort of try to attract people. So recruiting and selecting people who believe in that goal, believe in that vision, believe in that purpose becomes a huge way to not just recruit, but to keep them happy in the role.
Ashish, you must meet a lot of successful young entrepreneurs. How important is it, particularly in the current political climate, where there's this backlash against markets, backlash against capitalism? How important is it that successful entrepreneurs behave well in public, that they don't overspend, that they don't have garish taste, that they do have a social conscience? because one would suspect that as role models, they can either embody the good that you can do and the success you can have, or something that is perceived to be in bad taste and negative.
It's a very, very good question. I mean, I think, I've said multiple times in the past, especially when it comes to our youth, we need them to be inspired by the right thing. And therefore, success should be defined by the number of lives you touch and impact, and not necessarily wealth, right? And I think that's really, really important to get through to the next generation. I think just touching on the education point, obviously I'm probably the worst advocate for education, being a school dropout, but I think informal education is so critical, and the mentorship piece is a critical angle. And therefore, back to that, your question is, how mentors need to teach not only business and entrepreneurial skills, but also the values and the fact that, we've got to think long term, we've got to be, and there are challenges and there's bureaucracy, and especially in emerging markets, there's always bureaucracy, but there are only going to be the takers if there are givers as well. So I think it's a two-way street where equally entrepreneurs need to have that straightforward mindset.
Seth, the companies that you invest in, suddenly successful, extraordinary amount of money for a young person, do you offer lifestyle coaching and how to cope with that and how to be well behaved?
Yeah, you're looking at him. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. Before I was an investor, I was an entrepreneur myself. And when we raised our first round of funding for my company, which started off very accidentally, we ended up with $600,000. And none of us had run a single business before. And we very quickly realized that what we thought would be this, promised land of having all this money and all these resources was an incredible burden. Because now we had to spend this money which was given to us by someone else. And then, of course, we went on and raised more money, and it just became an even greater burden. So, yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult transition, but I don't think it's any more difficult than any of the other challenges that a young entrepreneur faces, right? So most entrepreneurs are going up against entrenched interests that have, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. They're trying to create something out of nothing. And so learning how to manage a large amount of money that they've never seen before is just a part and parcel with what it means to be an entrepreneur.
If I may add, I think, apart from the mentoring, also finding the right partner also helps a lot, right? For example, for Didi, we are lucky enough to have some very good partner like Apple, like Masa from SoftBank, and also Vision Fund of PIF. I think finding the right strategic partner that share the same vision will save a lot of your effort, because you don't need to explain again, what's our vision and where do we want to go, because they understand you and they are supporting you. I think that saves a lot of time, especially for entrepreneurs. And also, I think to create a flexible work style is the key right now for this generation. Because, for example, in China, 30 years ago, people were trying so hard, fighting for survival. But 30 years now, after the economic reform, survival is not the key, but people want to have impact, right? And the young generation, they want flexible hours. And that's why, here in Didi, what we're trying to promote, especially for women coders, women engineers, we let them to stay at home for one day. They pick a day so that they can do whatever they want. And at the same time, they can work from home. So flexibility is the key to attract top talents. They're not stick to 9 to 5 hours anymore. Yeah.
Jean, so reform formally began in China at the end of 1978. That was when the Party Congress approved Deng Xiaoping's.
Yes.
As that period gets further and further in the past, do young people still believe in markets in China, or are they becoming more and more skeptical of markets and unequal outcomes?
You mean
the way markets work? Because in the West now you see a lot of debate. In New Zealand you have a Prime Minister who this week said that capitalism has failed in New Zealand.
I see.
But is the Chinese evolution of economic thought among young people a little different because the recent history of communism and central planning is so fresh?
Sure. Well, I would say, young people or old people, especially the young one, definitely believe in market, right? This is where, innovation, this is where technology is powered from. And I think same as the country here, the region here, we are also going through this diversification period. China in the last 20 years were more focused on heavy industry and manufacturing, very driven by that. However, now we have some problem. So we are diversifying our economy into more technology, high tech, and consumption base. And who are the drivers? The young people are the drivers. Because in the old days, all the old, relatively elderly, wise people like to save everything in their bank, right? But now the young guys, they like sharing. They want to share everything. They're not obsessed with ownership anymore. They don't even need to buy a car. Nobody is obsessed to own an apartment, but people like to share. I think that's the driver for this diversification of economy. So people still believe in the market, but it's just how we can diversify our economy to make it more sustainable. That's why I feel really impressed when we heard the Crown Prince speech yesterday. I think there are a lot of similarities between different regions, and there's a lot of things we can do together. Yeah. So market is still the key, I would say.
I'll just push back a bit. I don't think that young people are disillusioned with capitalism in general. I think they're disillusioned with the version of capitalism that has dominated the world for the past 40 years. And the version I'm talking about is this sort of Milton Friedman-esque version. So in the 1970s, Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman wrote an op-ed in the New York Times called "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." And the basic argument was that all a business should do is return value for shareholders and nothing else. And he actually says in this essay, and I encourage everyone to read it, it's quite remarkable, that any business that considers anything beyond profits, that considers things like the welfare of its employees, the environment, the good of society, that they are undermining the basis of free society. He calls them radical discontents. And this version of capitalism, which has dominated the world for the past 40 years, has led to a host of problems. We're on the edge of a climate crisis, we have increasing inequality, we're failing to feed the world. And so I think it's this version of capitalism that the youth are disillusioned about, and I think for good reason. And so I think what we're seeing is a transition towards an idea of capitalism that says that business ought to be about more than just profit. That it should, yes, be about profit, but it should also be about solving societal or environmental problems.
Alicia, do you find, Seth just made a very interesting point, do you find among your younger employees that a similar concern about the social impact as well as the wage?
So Robert, we have, when you look at our business sort of in the GCC, and especially like in Dubai where we are headquartered, it's a very different environment over there. If you look at what the government's done in terms of new ministries that have been appointed, last year they appointed a Minister of Happiness, they've appointed a Minister of Tolerance, they've appointed a Minister of Artificial Intelligence. If you look at the average age of the minister, it's 28. They're really trying to make a very strong statement how important, I mean, in 3 years' time, half the workforce is going to be millennials. How important it is to look at the overall, what are the key areas that are important for the millennials and work towards that. So on one side, in Dubai, we have seen, and in the UAE, we have been seeing this, which is being adopted by the other regions in the GCC. Now, if I look at the home country in India, where it's again with democracy and capitalism, and where there is this huge sort of drive as far as startups and things are concerned. And it's really interesting to see that on the basis of it, I think with millennials, it's going to be more on the social impact side of it. And you have to create that environment, that ecosystem that is going to help them allow and help them grow.
Minister of Happiness sounds like a very stressful job. Actually, is the same debate taking place in its own way in Africa around sustainability versus profitability? Is there any contradiction, or should sustainability be built into profitability in the minds of the young?
I think in the minds of the youth, I mean, sustainability must be, I think it's inevitable that it must be built into the profitability angle. I think in Africa's perspective, we genuinely do have a very, very educated, young population who is really driven, who actually is truly inspired by what's going on around the world, but also very cognizant of the fact that we have certain advantages on the ground that we could truly take advantage of. And therefore, when you think about the fact that there's going to be the amount of trade, physically, Africa is larger than North America, Western Europe, India, China, and New Zealand put together. We're physically huge. So when you think about that diversity and everything else, the true potential of cross-border trade, of the innovation that's going to come out from things like mobile money and everything else, it's just going to be truly phenomenal. But our youth are very cognizant, I think, also, that this combination of doing good and doing well is the solution. And I think Jean touched on it, which is combine that with partnerships and the right types of partners who have the right, a similar mindset of truly making a difference. I think, there's a huge amount of potential. And 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world over the last decade have been in Africa and are projected to be the case in the next decade. And we've seen true transformation. I mean, I think what's challenging as a continent is that we're really generalized quite a bit on several different factors. But when you take an example of where I'm from, which is Rwanda, the last 23 years, the true transformation under President Kagame has been phenomenal. 63% of our parliament are women. It's the highest in the world. Zero corruption, zero bureaucracy. So it's possible, and it's happening. Transformation is truly happening on every perspective.
Seth, is there enough money to support good ideas, or is there too much money to support bad ideas?
I think that there's a lot of capital available. My experience and expertise is in sort of the world of startups and technology. So whether or not there's enough capital in the PE market, I have no idea. But I can talk about VC and startups. I think there is a wealth of capital out there. I think if you are reasonably charismatic and can put full sentences together, you can raise money in the Valley for almost any idea. However, I don't think that there's enough money available for the best ideas. So a lot of the ideas that we are talking about, things that can both create massive positive social and environmental impact, and at the same time become billion-dollar-a-year businesses, I think it's still very hard to raise money for those ideas. And I think it's largely because if you look at the makeup of a lot of these VC firms, aside from being incredibly undiverse, I'm lucky enough to have founded 50 years with an amazing woman, Ella Made, but aside from being incredibly undiverse, they're the older generation that still sees business in this sort of black and white, you either make money, and if you want to do good, go found a nonprofit. Which means that they often see these millennial entrepreneurs who come with these exceptionally good ideas and say, come on, goody two-shoes, like get a real job. And so we find that, especially at the later stages, there's not enough capital available. And so if there's capital in this room that wants an interesting opportunity, I think these companies are going to be the most valuable companies of the next 20 years. And so I think it's an incredible opportunity.
Jean, I was listening to a very prominent person in Silicon Valley recently, and he was asked, will autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, be allowed on the road? And he said that's completely the wrong question. The question will be, will people be allowed to drive cars in the age of autonomous, because it's inherently that much unsafer. Right. You're obviously doing work in autonomous cars. One of the consequences of autonomous cars potentially is fewer drivers. Yes. How much do you think ahead about the long-term impact on employment of not only autonomous cars, but autonomous things generally?
Sure. I actually think that's a great question, and it's not just about technology. It's a social problem. Right? It's a people problem. So as a business where we are transporting people by people, we think a lot about it. To be very honest, I don't think anyone in this world has figured something really perfectly solution out. However, I would say let's step back and think, why do we need a car without a driver? A lot of people like driving so much, right? Why do we want a car without driver? I think the key reason is about safety. Right now in this world, every year, 1.3 million people die on the road. If you think about it, that's bigger number than wars and drugs plus, together. That's a huge number. And 30 years down the road, when we look back, we will be like, this is ridiculous. What were we thinking about when you go out and you may die on the road because of accident? So what's the autonomous driving do for you is, because of the robot, if you will. They share the information so quickly, they share the experience, and it learns really fast. It's 360-degree of view. That's the key, beauty part of this. And now, for our platform, we are already paying so much attention to safety. The average road mortality rate worldwide is 1.6 deaths per 100 million miles. That's how people look at it. Per 100 million miles, 1.6 deaths, unfortunately. And in this platform, on our platform, because of the technology we use, because of the scoring system we give to the driver, the training, it's 50% less, the number, but it's still not good enough. I think that's why people are trying to push for a safer technology. However, to answer your question, I think it should be a progress. It's a progressive status instead of all of a sudden 5 years down the road, all the cars will be driven by robots, right? It will be in a geofencing zone, and it may shift goods rather than people in the beginning, and gradually we get there. That's number one on technology and maturity. Number two, on the drivers. We're lucky enough, the main market we're in China, there are 1.4 billion rides. Everyone needs to go out, and we only cover 20-some million. So penetration is only 1.some%. So my assumption is there will always be people who want a human face to serve, because it's a service business. So there's still enough pie for human drivers who have good service, and the incremental part of the incremental part could be replaced by the autonomous driving. So that's what we have been thinking right now, but I think maybe next year, if you ask me this question, we have more thoughtful. I think everyone, it's a problem facing the whole mankind. And in addition to that, it's not just about autonomous driving, it's about the next generation of cars. It's not just about driverless cars, it's about new energy cars. Right? I think that's also one of the key topics here. How do we make our energy more sustainable? So the next generation of cars could be autonomous, could be greener. It will be new energy cars. Right? It's designed for sharing instead of designing for consumers.
Thanks, Jean. Well, look, to finish up, I'd like to ask each of our panelists for our hosts in the kingdom and for our guests from around the world, what one tip would you give our hosts to encourage entrepreneurialism and to motivate young people? Ashish?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to give two quick ones. One is, I think your biggest regret in the next few years would be if you don't invest in Africa. So please invest in Africa. don't have any regrets. And I think, secondly, genuinely, the youth are they're not the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today, and there's no better example than the crown prince in the kingdom.
Robert, I would say that the world is for the taking for the dreamers. So the bigger you can dream, the better it's going to be. So never stifle your dreams. It's easy for us to get shot down, but you have to get back up, believe in it, and keep moving with what you really believe in.
I would say as young generation, people are passionate, are really innovative. At the same time, please have a global view. Please be thoughtful, be collaborative, because there are a lot of existing issues we need to tackle together. So I would say be innovative, at the same time be thoughtful, be disruptive, at the same time be collaborative, because we need to solve the existing issue, otherwise we won't be able to break through. We need to make sure this is an oil plus economy. We need to make sure this is a taxi plus rideshare. We need to make sure this is autonomy plus human drivers. So let's solve the existing problem together. Let's bring the world step forward. Yeah.
I would say focus on the grand challenges of the world. I think the world's biggest problems also represent the biggest opportunities. And I also think it's incredibly important to be open to the sort of new version of capitalism that we all talked about. So I love data, and so just so you don't think it's four people on stage giving you their own opinions. There's a really interesting organization called Net Impact that does studies of actually MBA graduates, so the sort of most money-grubbing members of society. And last year they did a survey, and part of the survey they asked the MBA graduates what they thought about businesses with a social or environmental impact. And they actually said over 80% said that they would take a 15% pay cut to work for a company that had positive social or environmental impact. And just to put that in perspective, 9 years ago, they ran that same survey, and that number was 26%. And 5 years before that, it was 15%. So 15%, 26%, over 80%. This is a significant and sustained trend. And so as you're looking to support the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, and as you're looking, where you can find the best opportunities, I would say that's where, these companies that are both going to make a lot of money and solve these big global challenges.
Our panelists have given us a fascinating glimpse into the future. They've been very generous with their time and very generous with their thoughts. We should be very generous with our applause. Thank you. Very good. Very good.